Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. This is Julie Henricus, Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I'm really delighted to welcome Mark Bergin to the podcast this week. Mark spent 4 years as a newspaper reporter before joining the Alexandria, Virginia Police Department in 1986. Twice named Police Officer of the Year for narcotics and robbery investigations, he served in most of the posts he described in Apprehension, his debut novel, which will be republished in 2026 as part of a 4-book contract with Level Best Books. Kirkus Reviews called Apprehension compelling and says Bergin is a gritty and authentic new voice in police fiction. Apprehension was a finalist for the 2020 Silver Falchion Award from Killer Nashville. He has short stories published in several crime anthologies, including the 2023 Anthony-nominated Paranoia Blues and Land of 10,000 Thrills. He's a member of Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, Virginia Writers Club, and International Thriller Writers. He and his wife live in Alexandria, Virginia, and Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. That was a lot of words to say. I'm gritty and I surround myself with smart people. I can get into anthologies that make me look good, but I learn a lot.
Well, you and I have already started this conversation, but we're going to get it on the books now. When did you say to yourself, I want to write a novel?
When I was 12, which is an earlier answer than you thought. I remember going back to the library for certain books that I'd already read because I wanted to read again how the author had done it, how he had introduced the scene, how he had set the fuse and then lit it before it exploded. And I think the first author that I really, really gravitated to was Alistair MacLean. Now, I don't write anything like Alistair MacLean. God would, I would love to be able to write his address the way he does, but he's dead. The Guns of Navarone, Where Eagles Dare, Ice Station Zebra. My favorite novel of all time is The Secret Ways by Alistair MacLean. It's a 1959 spy story. He's a thrilling writer, and his pacing is wonderful. So I'd always wanted to write, and I always imagined writing a book to be the pinnacle of intellectual or even human endeavor. And I don't understand people who say, I never wanted to write. I literally don't understand that. I went to college. I was an English major, and I transferred so I could take journalism. I was a newspaper reporter for 4 years until two things. One, I wanted to be on the other side of the yellow tape. I wanted to be doing the stuff that I was writing about. And I grew up in the Northeast. And since all the cops that I knew were brutal, corrupt, and racist, I didn't think I could be a cop. I didn't think that I wanted to do that. I mean, they did everything else the cops did. They solved crime. They handled car accidents. They got kids' bicycles, all the other stuff that the cops do. But they took graft money. They beat up black people. And they were all 6'4" former MPs. And that was not me. Until I got to Virginia, and I was actually covering a department in a way that I could get to know the officers. And it obviously changed my life. Became a cop, did that for 28 years. I was a cop until one day in 2013, I died. I had 2 heart attacks in one morning, and the doctors believe that my heart stopped both times and speculate that I started it again by hitting the ground so hard. I am the luckiest man in America. I went on from that. I went through rehab. I could have gone back to work, but I'd had 28 years on. And so I chose to retire in 2014, and I went back to a series of notes that I had typed out in 1988 when I was going through a particularly tough time, my first marriage, as opposed to my last marriage, which I'm in now, was tanking. I was in a very, very high-speed drug unit, working a lot of hours, and I was so burnt out. It wasn't a conscious decision to try and just get it off my chest, but I went out and bought a little word processor. Now, in 1988, a word processor was a box that you bought at Hecht's department store with an orange screen that you fed paper in the top, and it had a keyboard on a string, and you could do like 1 or 2 documents. I ended up doing 3 pages, single-spaced, of notes for a story about a cop under stress, and then just put them away because I got it off my chest. When I figured out I was going to retire, I went looking for that paper and I couldn't find it, but I remembered it, and I remembered every word of it, and I recreated it. And then how do you write a book? You've got an idea, and you got some other ideas, and you fill in the stuff in between, and you spend a year, and boy, I was all done. I was all happy. Look, it's all done. No. It took a long time. I got it published in 2019. It's the book Apprehension. And like I say, I'm the luckiest man in America. Level Best has not only bought my newest book, which will now be the second book in the series.
Great.
They've gone back and bought the first book that will come out first next year. They'll publish the second book, and I'm writing the third and the fourth as we speak.
So we're going to talk about publishing, because that's a whole different conversation than writing. But when you pull up these notes, and you've obviously had this character and you've been living the life, so you have lots of fodder. But how did you learn the craft of writing a book?
Well, maybe you should ask me in about 5 or 10 years when I've learned the craft of writing a book. I read a lot. I read a lot. I read 3 novels a week all my life until now that I'm old. But I know what a good book looks like. I know what a good story looks like. I know what bad ones look like. Mm-hmm. So I was familiar with storytelling. I not to brag, but I knew what it was. I knew how it was supposed to look on the paper. I knew how it was supposed to sound. So I wrote it. And then I discovered that there were people who would help you write, not just editors, but writers groups. I wish I'd known. I'm in a writers group now in Alexandria called the Royal Writers Secret Society, because they used to meet at a restaurant called the Royal. And they are a number of published authors who've won Anthonys and Derringers and have multi-book contracts. Stacey Woodson, Rick Pullen, Lane Stone, Jeff Higgins, Tom Milani just got published. And I can share my writing with them. Austin Camacho. The idea of sharing my writing with somebody was so alien to me. It wasn't something cops did, other than at the end of the night, you gave your report to the sergeant and he handed it back with whiteout all over it to correct your mistakes. The cooperative and helpful nature of the writing community just blows me away. I wasn't what I was expecting. I have more friends now as a writer. If I can call myself a writer since 2014, I have more writer friends now in the 11 years than I ever had as a cop. I keep in contact with maybe 4 people from all of my time on the police department. I can pick up the phone and have coffee or beers with 50 people tomorrow afternoon. It's magnificent. And I like writers. I feel like the kid that walked off the stage at high school as the understudy in Music Man and suddenly ended up behind the red carpet at the Oscars. I mean, Lee Child is not a friend, but I can walk up and talk to Lee Child. And I did. Oh my gosh. What a wonderful world. All these conferences we have. So have I gone too far away from whatever the question was a while ago?
No, I mean, but it's I never want to put words in people's mouths, but I think that there's, you'd always want to be a writer. You were a reporter, a journalist, and that's storytelling. It's very condensed, but it's like, you got to hook them. Like you don't have a lot of time to meander. And it's like, this is why I'm telling you the story. Here's the story and here's the end. I mean, boom, you got to do it.
At its core, the similarities between newspaper writing and fiction and entertainment writing is telling a story that people are going to read.
Yeah.
I was an English major at Villanova University with no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I tripped over a journalism elective. I'd never really wanted to be a newspaper reporter, but so this is something I could do. And I fell in love with the idea of going out, finding out stuff, writing it down, and letting people read it, and then they would know it. So that's what writing is. And for us, it's deciding on a story, writing it down, and then writing it again and again and again so that it's entertaining, so that you're coming into, I didn't know before, but I really learned to stress that first chapter, that first page, that first line. I hadn't thought about it. And not everybody does that. I mean, if you read 6 Days of the Condor by James Grady, who's a wonderful guy and he's a friend of mine, that book starts so slow, but it's the international bestseller and one of the greatest thrillers of all time. And it breaks all the rules. But learning to tell the story, learning to use the right words, learning to bang your way in. I like to start in media res. I want something happening the moment you open the page, the moment you open the chapter. And I want a little mini short story to be told in the chapter and then end on a little bit of a cliffhanger or a little bit of a punch to get the person to read the next chapter. But my problem is my next chapter is never the one that follows this one. All of my books so far have been multi-character, and I'll start the book with my main character, who's a detective in Alexandria, Virginia, and first his rival girlfriend, public defender, Rachel, and one of his partners, and there's a bad guy, and there's all that stuff. So I jump from them. I use all of them, and then they dovetail at the end for whatever my kind of theme or crescendo will be. Crisis, denouement, lots of words.
So you didn't make it easy on yourself with the first book, like, multiple points of view and doing I mean,
I didn't think I was making it harder on myself. I had a lot to say. Everything in the first book, almost everything in the first book is true. It didn't all happen to me, and it didn't all happen exactly the way I wrote it. But the voodoo witch doctor in Apprehension, who puts a root on a case and it disappears, is true. Some of the other activities, pulling over the car and insulting the driver's girlfriend, that happened to me. Not in that order. And I wanted Apprehension to be, and I was maybe too clinical, an examination of what police work is like in an entertaining way. But I wanted people to read it and go, oh, that's why cops do that. That's what's happening there. That explains what I see when I drive by and I see them doing something. I wanted it to be very real. So real that I ended up having to set it in 1988 because the book keys on a law that changed in early 1989. So I had to, if I wanted to tell a true story, I had to make it then. But also, I tried rewriting it once to present day, and I had to keep breaking cell phones. You leave the cell phone behind, it would fall out the window, the battery would go out. Because if anybody had a cell phone, none of this would have happened. Everybody would have just called up and worked things out, and it would have been about a 40-page nothing.
Yeah.
The second book is a little wilder. The third book is much more wild, and the fourth book, when I get to it, is a pure thriller. It goes to Ireland. It's got the Mossad and the IRA and Nazis and all kinds of cool stuff.
So 1988 is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but if for some folks would consider historical fiction because it's almost 40 years ago. But you're right. The time, Sue Grafton wrote her series and kept it in the mid 80s for that same reason. It's like cell phone. It's just it's a different time. No computers, or maybe some, but you use typewriters. I mean, it's just a different way of.
We use pens.
Yeah.
You hand the report to the sergeant at night. And if he's got a problem with it, you've got a pen, you white it out with whiteout and you wrote over it.
Yeah.
And you would do that. And if the sergeant took your paper and held it up to the light and there were more than 5 blotches, you'd crush it and hand it back and say, do it again. The second book is set in 2002 because I have characters that were greatly impacted by 9/11. Mm-hmm. Alexandria, Virginia. I don't know where you are, but
I'm right outside of Boston. So,
cool. I went to Boston University. Alexandria is right next to Arlington and the Pentagon. So we were greatly impacted by what happened right there. I was on patrol the next night and I had to ask headquarters, hey, headquarters, I'm in Park Fairfax neighborhood. I smell a house fire. Is fire working something? No. I was smelling the fire from the Pentagon. There's a certain odor to it, and when you're patrolling, you're looking for that. So I had characters that were affected by this. I had a guy that worked, I have a friend that worked the scene at the Pentagon in well, we can euphemistically call it evidence recovery, but it was body recovery. So I wanted to set it there to examine what he'd gone through and the stress of all of that. The third book is just sort of now, and I'll see whether my loyal readers will be kind to me. My new readers won't notice. I'm just placing it as if everything's here. Now, my characters aged between the first book and the second book. They aged an appropriate number of years between 1988 and 2002. So between 2002 and now...
Yeah, book time.
Yeah, exactly. Book time.
It's book time. So story structure and everything else like that. I mean, I think reading, especially reading in the genre or the subgenre that you want to write in is the best, and analyzing books is obviously you've done as your whole life. It's like, why is this working? Why is this not working? How am I going to do this? Did you, and you've got a writer's group, did you take any classes or do anything, No?
A writer named Tom Young, who writes military adventure, I reached out to him when I was trying to get published because I'd read one of his great books about airplanes and special forces and junk. And in the back, he said, he lives in Alexandria, write me at so-and-so. So I wrote him at so-and-so. Hey, I'm trying to be your author. Can I buy you lunch? We met, had lunch. He gave me the best piece of advice. He said, go to conferences and start looking at what the business looks like. They'll teach you how to write. They'll teach you how to sell your book. They'll teach you lots of good stuff. He was more talking about things like the Sewanee Writers Conference that he had attended. Yeah. I ended up going to Thriller Fest and just was gobsmacked. I mean, the concept of it was amazing to me. I'd never heard of a writers conference. And I'm online looking at all the panels, and I'm thinking, wow, I can learn how these people do setting, because I never really cared about setting. I mean, I got people going through a city, but that just happens to be where they are. Character, conflicts, finding publishers, reaching out to agents. And there's Jeffrey Deaver walking around. There's Lee Child. There's all kinds of people. It was astounding to me. It was exciting. Going to the bar and talking with people, not yet knowing how to talk to them, not yet knowing how to grab an agent and say, hey, I got a book for you. But I guess in writing the book, I was self-taught, because I knew what it was supposed to look like. I knew what my story structure was. I write a very tight timeline. The first book takes place in, I think, 5 days, and it's chronological. Each step leads to the next step. If Kelly's getting off an elevator at 3 p.m, Rachel's getting on the elevator at 3 a.m. and 3 o'clock, and they meet each other, which can be challenging. I got to one book and I found I'd completely skipped a day. I had something that I got Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Oh, I got to have something on Thursday, right? Don't I? So it's, you can write yourself into a hole. I also, when I really figured out I wanted to try writing, I went back and reread my favorite authors, reread a book by almost all of my favorite authors. Tony Hillerman, Elmore Leonard, Adam Hall, Jack Hunter, James Lee Burke, James Elroy, Dashiell Hammett, Alistair MacLean, and John D. MacDonald. You mentioned about the cop stories. I deliberately did not read Joseph Wambach, who is one of my favorites. He's the god of police fiction, because I knew that the story I had in my mind was very, very close to one of his stories called The Black Marble. And I didn't want to reread that because I didn't want to have that in my mind. I had read it 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I didn't want to have it in my mind for fear of either copying him or seeing that I was accidentally copying him. There's only so many plots in the whole world, and it's hard to write a new one. You just try and sort of give a little bit of a different perception. My friend Angelique Babar wrote a book recently about Irish crime fiction,
Yes.
Finders. And she examines Irish crime fiction, I think, since World War II. And it's almost a series of book reports. And I wanted to read it because my book 4 will take place in Ireland. And I thought, okay, I'll read this book. I'll pick up some lingo. I'll get some ideas I've been to Ireland, but let me catch how the bad guys are talking. And I had to stop because, oh my gosh, Adrian McGinty wrote what I wanted to write. I don't want to know that he did that. I want to do it separately. So you learn, and then you submit stuff with your writers group and they say, this isn't clear. Somebody said the worst kind of criticism is where somebody says, you should change this word to this and you should restructure this. And the best kind is, that doesn't work for me. Yeah. I think it was Neil Gaiman. And we do both of those. But that doesn't work for me is wonderful because I've got to go back and take a look at it. Because obviously it worked for me, 10 book writer you. And 3 anthologies, does that mean 3 stories? One in each anthology from you, or?
Yeah, one in each anthology so far, yeah.
You know how perfect it looks when it first comes out of you.
Yeah.
And then someone else says, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling it. This isn't a big enough crisis to warrant all the fuss. Oh, okay. Again, I tried to make the first book very realistic, and I got a lot less realistic in the second and the third. I went more toward thriller and excitement. It's all still theoretically possible, but I hope it's entertaining too.
Well, and that's part of the joy of writing is you can make stuff up. But given that you had this long career in the police force, do you find that gets in your way or that you can get jargony and you're like, no one's got, just you write a script saying, I have no idea what you just said or what that means because how do you balance that? Because
the writers group is more, don't keep telling us all of this stuff. It's very clear what you're doing. And yeah, I can be too jargony. I can sometimes assume that people know what I'm talking about, but too often it's a little bit too much. Here's why a police report number is written with these digits in this certain way. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Although I use that to illustrate, okay, here's the report number. That tells me what day it is. That tells me that it's early in the year so I can set the time and the weather and everything else. I thought I was being clever. It's hard. I know I've had a lot of fun with Sisters in Crime, with not just the Chessie chapter, but all of them, and going to panels, talking with people. I spent hours at Killer Nashville last year talking with some authors after I was on a panel saying, I can answer your cop questions. And they come up and say, oh, what would happen if? How do I write? What would they do? It's my favorite thing in the whole world. If nothing else comes out of this, Julie, I want people to feel free to reach out to me and ask me a question or say I've got a question. I'd rather talk with them than spend all of the time typing it, but whatever. I like it when the cop stuff's accurate, but it doesn't always have to be perfectly accurate. And this is from a person who, in his first book, it's been corrected for the second edition, put the Jefferson Memorial in the wrong place. I had a pursuit go over a bridge, and I put the memorial at the end of that bridge, but it's not there. It's 3 bridges up. So I could fix that. When anybody asks me a question, would a police chief do a homicide interview? My first question back to them is, what do you want to happen? Yeah. Well, yeah, of course I do, because he's my hero. Okay, all right, then let's do that. Because no, a police chief's not going to do a homicide interview. Chiefs don't do police work. Chiefs sign budgets and make speeches to city council and review internal investigations and do all of that junk. But If we want the chief to do it, then we make the victim his sister. We make it a small department. We make him accidentally be the first responding officer who makes the arrest. And so he wants to show his guys how to do it, right or wrong. So we'll get you where you want to be. And as long as it's explained in some way, as long as, how come the police just couldn't have used the radio to get the fire department to come? The radio's failed. The radio broke. You're in a dead zone. Every city has got a dead zone somewhere where the radios don't work. Put your good guy there, and he can't call for help. But you don't just do it that moment. You have him 5 chapters ago passing through the dead zone, and he listens and the radio goes out. So you establish that. So I love doing that. It makes me cringe, but I can watch bad cop shows on TV. My favorite bad cop show on TV right now is called Wild Cards. It's on the CW. It's just silly. It's a tough, by-the-book cop and a beautiful young woman who is a con artist. And she's been sort of suborned into the department to help with cases because she can think like a criminal. And they bounce off of each other. It's just fun. It's just light. I don't watch Law and Order. I don't think I've watched more than 1 episode of Law and Order. I've never watched Chicago PD because they just look too real. I didn't watch The Wire all the way through because I did that. I was a street-level narcotics officer for 2 years, which is where I met my wife because she was a public defender of the people that I was arresting for street dealing. And so we started watching The Wire one time. We got about 2 episodes in and I said, no, this is Antonio's case and Billy's case and Marcia's case. And so it wasn't entertaining. I should watch it again just because everybody talks about it. And I guess I need to do it for research and cultural understanding. But I can be sometimes too strict and I try not to be. But does the story work? I had a person who wrote a story where her character was driving and the police chief called her on the cell phone and said, I know you're driving out to the farm. Don't you go to the farm. I told you not to. And it's obvious he's tracking her phone. So to me, who knows that the cops can't just track a phone, that makes him a bad guy. No, she thought cops could do that. So I hope that people will find a way to run some of their stuff by. For me, for one reader, who cares? But it was a book that I was disappointed at in the end because I'd been set up to believe this person was bad because of a bad thing he did, but it wasn't bad. It was just misunderstanding.
It's tricky, police procedurals and conversations about the police force. Even when you're talking 1988 to 2000, whenever this next phase is, perceptions and understanding and policing and there's so many conversations that make it, I think, a better but a richer, much more complicated conversation. Do you find that, especially when we started this conversation, you said being from the Northeast and only knowing racist, corrupt cops.
I grew up in the Northeast, so I knew Philadelphia, I knew Boston, I knew all the Connecticut cities, and I spent time in them. And I guess as I examine that statement, there are bad cops anywhere and everywhere. And since the time of George Floyd, since the time of Michael Brown, there's been a lot more attention to that with Black Lives Matter. Cops aren't the guaranteed good guys in stories anymore. And, maybe they shouldn't have been, but it's easy. We want a good guy. We want a bad guy. We want them to clash. But I guess bad cops are everywhere. And it was my perception only because I thought, I thought all the bad cops are in Philadelphia and Boston because that's where I'd lived. But they're in Charlotte and they're in Miami and they're in New Orleans and they're out there. So we there isn't necessarily a universal cop. Everybody has a perception of cops. I think cops, let me get all the way through the sentence and then I'll get myself out of the embarrassing sound. I think cops are the most prejudiced against group in America. I'm not going to say that Black people are not prejudiced against, they're not the victims of racism and bigotry, but everybody knows what a cop is. Everybody's got an idea what a cop is. There's 1,000 different kinds of cops, but everybody has an idea of what a cop's going to be doing. So they prejudge what a cop's going to be. All the way down to, what's the song? Like looking in my mirror and seeing a police car, and there's a cop behind me. They're not after you. Maybe in some cities they are, but better departments try to avoid that. So you can write any kind of cop character you want. And I'm not against writing bad cops. They're out there. I don't like it when it's just casual, when there's a presumption that all the cops are that way. Much like my presumption was maybe when I wasn't going to join the cops where I grew up. But you can have bad ones. I hope you can have bad ones and we'll clean them up by the end of the story. What was the old television code of ethics? The bad guys couldn't win. We've certainly given up on that. But yeah, it used to be on TV. By the end of the show, the bad guys had to meet their end. Either they killed each other or the cops caught them or whatever it was. That rule would strangle a lot of good fiction.
So, complicated stories. I've also have had the good fortune of talking to several reporters or journalists, who are also crime writers or, sometimes they're doing both. Sometimes they were journalists. But in the conversations with them, and I'm wondering, because you were a journalist and also as an officer, sometimes it must be that this story in real life didn't go well or didn't turn out well, and you can't fix it. You can't fix what happened or make this story justice prevail or something. But when you're writing it, you can actually get the bad guy or call something out or do what you can't do in real life. Does that drive you at all in both of these careers you've had?
It does, in a couple of ways. I just, like we think about things. What could, here's a situation I remember. Could I use that in a story? And I remember a time when I wish I had done a thing differently. This is really silly and really trivial, but I was the lieutenant, the watch commander for the day. I'm the senior patrol officer on the street, and everybody's answering to me. There was a Taylor Swift concert in Alexandria. This was 15 years ago. A school in Alexandria won a contest by getting all of their kids to write fan letters to Taylor Swift. So that 100% participation, they won a concert. And she comes to the concert. And I was outside of it because there were a lot of cops there and I was just checking in. And the sergeant in charge of the motor squad came up to me and said, is there any way they want a full lights and siren escort out of here? And I said, Joe, we can't do that. We're not allowed to do that. And he was disappointed, and I knew I was disappointing them, and it would have been really kind of cool, but you just can't do that. So that I told him no. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it this morning, and I came up with what I wish I had done, because there's always a way to wangle. A lot of my books are about, here's the official thing that you absolutely have to do, but there's a little wiggle room down here that you could use to get it done. And I wish I had said to him, I'm not the traffic expert. You are, Sergeant. This is your traffic unit. And if, in your opinion, the traffic situation as this bus gets down this road and gets out onto the main street and before the highway, if, in your opinion, you need to use lights and sirens to clear other traffic and make this entire passage safe, you have my blessing. So you see, I'm not allowed to tell him to do it, but I can tell him to do the best thing. And then I can stand behind him and say, he did the best thing, Chief. I agree with his judgment. And then if it's wrong, it falls on me. I wish I had thought of that. And I'm trying to work that scene into a book. Now, I don't have a lieutenant who is involved in my stories, but I could have one of my characters talking to the lieutenant when he's making that decision. And I might just do that just to sort of long distance apologize to the guys that I said, no, you can't do that. A lot of my books, I like to show that the cops can fail. The cops can lose a case. There's only so much we can do against the defense attorneys. You'll note that I said I have a defense attorney character in the book. She's a public defender. She's not my wife. My wife is always very quick to say she's not my wife. But she's a female public defender who was involved with a cop, and that part matches. And Kelly doesn't necessarily do well against her. I don't want to give everything away. I'm hoping everybody's going to run right out and read the books, but I don't want to tell them how it ends. But it's a process. We arrest somebody, and we've got to gather stuff together to give it to a judge with enough to give the judge or jury enough certainty that they're going to convict. The lead story yesterday was Diddy Puff, Diddy, whatever his name is, that they didn't get convictions. That's the lead story. The Senate voted on the Trump bill yesterday, probably the most significant, I'm not going to get into politics, but probably the most significant bill in American history in terms of impact on society. And we led with Puff Diddy Combs. People care about that stuff. So I like to show the challenges. And maybe so do others. I mean, Dirty Harry was a cop up against the system, and he took things into his own hands. I won't have my character probably take things into his own hands, but I may have him take those hands just up as far as he possibly can to that line and look over the edge and see what he can do.
It's a balancing act. So I want to talk about writing some more. So how do you've talked about first book, second book, third book, you've got 4 books, which is great because then you can really write an arc and you can, figure out what you're doing with these characters. You've obviously thought ahead if book 4 takes place in Ireland. So what's your process for writing? Do you have this story mapped out in your head? Do you plot? Do you just sit down and with characters who are speaking to you? How do you, do you write one point of view and then add the other points of view? Talk to me about how you write a book.
I'm definitely a plotter. And you get an idea for a story. Here's a crime. Here's how a cop gets into the crime. Here's the challenge of that crime. And I sort of envision an arc for that. I might make some notes. I carry a notebook with me all the time. I do my best writing in the car while I'm driving, which is to say I'll talk into my phone and say, have Kelly show up at the bar after the shooting, and here's what he's going to see. So I can get out of the car later and write that down. And so I know what's going to happen here, but then I'm going to say, I like to tell it from multiple points of view. I want to give my Rachel Cohen, the public defender, something to do. So I create a case for her, or I have one, or I've got one I always wanted to use. So she's defending a person in this case, and it may have nothing to do with Kelly, but she's working on it. In the second book, I guess maybe people will forget if I say that by the time of the second book, they're married and they have kids. So they're home and they can talk about cases. But there's certain cases they can't talk about. He can't tell her, even if she's not on the case, he can't talk about what he's doing. And she's not supposed to give him legal advice. Now, does it happen? Of course it does. They're eating dinner and Kelly's ruminating about, I couldn't get a search warrant for the car and this happened. And she said, well, what if you said this? Just for example. So I write all those down and I start to get chapters. As I said with the first book, when I had the 3 pages of notes, that was 5 chapters. It was a beginning, some middle, and an end. So I wrote them down on a piece of paper and said, okay, what happens in between? After this happens on this day, how do I get to this day? What else is happening at the same time? Who else could be involved at the same time? So then I come up with a very thin, line by line. This is my current outline. Mm-hmm. And it's one line for right now, 32 chapters. And I came up with 3 more chapters today because I met with a detective who's helping me work out parts of the homicide investigation that I need in this book 3. I was never a homicide investigator. I was never an investigator. I was a police officer who we do our own field investigations. And then as a sergeant and a lieutenant, we do investigations, but generally they're of officer misconduct. But it's still interviewing people and taking notes and writing reports. But so I come up with all of these, and in about a week's time, each of these lines will be a piece of paper on my wall. And I'll have 35 pieces of paper up on the wall. And in about 3 weeks, I'll go, okay, chapter 22 has to come before chapter 19 because it's night instead of day. I've got to switch those, and I'll literally switch it. And if I come up with a note or an idea of it would be cool if Rachel's car broke down, because then she'd have to go to the garage and walk back through the drug area, and all of her drug clients will wave at her and say, "Hey, Ms. Rachel, how you doing?" And all the cops will be driving by and saying, "Lady, what are you doing in this neighborhood?" That's a true story. So I see where I might insert that, and I put that note in there. And then when I get there, I can write it. It'll take me months to do this, and then it'll take me a day to write each chapter. My chapters are anywhere between 3, 5, 8 pages. I don't write by length. I write by getting through, starting where I need to start to kickstart the motion for that person, telling the info that's the importance of the chapter, and then getting to that cliffhanger. I've had one chapter that was 1 page, just because there was nothing else to say right there, but I had to put that person right there to be ready for the next person to react to them. So I'm absolutely a pantser. And at the same time, I talk about I'm writing book 3. Book 4 and book 3 had been the same book until I figured out how much junk I was putting into this. And I had like 500 pages worth of stuff. So I saw that book 3 had a good cliffhangery moment that I could stop it on. I'm telling multiple stories. No cop is ever working one case. So Kelly's working this case, and he's working that case, and he's working another case. So I can close out one case satisfactorily and give some closure there and end that. But the other case, not so much. And that'll be book 4. I've never done this. I really haven't talked that much with my editors at Level Best. I've never had editors before. So I'm hoping that they'll go for it. But they seem to be giving me free rein. And if they don't, then I'm going to give them a 500-page manuscript. And I'll say, hey, this is where the story goes. or just cut it.
So when you work for months on this outline and you have these pages up and you take notes on the pages and you really understand point, who's telling the story, what the action, why this chapter exists, and all that stuff, and then you said a chapter a day to like get this written. So for your first draft, and as a plotter, your first draft's probably pretty solid because you've thought through all of this,
My wife, my first beta reader, wouldn't necessarily agree with you on that, but I know where you're going. Yeah, it's 75% there. Everything happens there that I want to happen. Now I just have to make somebody want to read it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes add a scene or whatever you're doing. It's fascinating that you're talking about the multiple cases too, because I think that's something people don't understand.
It doesn't show on TV. Nobody on TV writes reports. And the only author that I've ever read where the cops write reports is Michael McInerney in New Mexico. Half of what any cop does is writing down the other half of what he was doing so that other people have it. Every cop is working multiple cases, unless you're maybe the absolute A-team homicide investigators in Alexandria who might have 6 homicides a year. So you get to focus on one and that's all you're doing. Now, there's a homicide. Those guys are going to focus on that case. But at some point, there's another homicide or there's a missing person. And missing persons in Alexandria are handled by our best detectives. Yeah. So they've got that to do. Now, they wouldn't necessarily stop chasing a bad guy if they had a good suspect and they had to do surveillance and things. But at some point, I don't have anything that I can do further on the murder, Lieutenant. So I'm going to work on this other case that just landed on my desk.
Right.
And if you're a burglary investigator, there's 70 cases on your desk. And if you're a stolen car investigator, there might be 100 cases on your desk. So you're always trying to do something. You're trying to talk to people. You're trying to talk to other departments that are finding your car. Our cars get stolen and they're found in PG. Okay, where are they found in? They're found on this street. Okay, who lives there? Oh, that guy. We arrested him 2 years ago for GLA, and now he lives in that. That's how detectives do all that stuff. But it's never just one thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is neat about police officers, just police officers in general, is the ability to multitask. I was a training officer for a number of years. I really, really liked that. The kids come out of the police academy and they ride with a training officer for 10 weeks, for 13 weeks, for 20 weeks. It's gone up the more we've found out all the things we need to teach them. But the hardest thing to learn is you're going to be driving a car and you're going to be looking out the window driving the car so you're not killing everybody while you're driving the car. And everybody's going to be looking at you, so you try not to look right back at them, but you can look at them. But while you're driving the car, you're also looking at the license tags of the car in front of you. Are they dead? Did they expire? Are they there? You're looking at the driver. Is the driver furtive? Is the driver falling over? Is the car swerving? You're listening. You've got your windows open. Even in the worst weather, a good cop will have the windows down just slightly so they can hear the car crash, they can hear the gunshot, they can hear the tires screech, the woman calling for help. It happens. And they're listening to the radio. They're listening for their call sign. Unit 331, 333, respond for the burglary in progress at 6049 North Morgan Street, code 3 response. So they have to hear their number come up. They're also listening for where their partners are. They're driving around and their sector mate, their squad mate who's working close to them, stops for a traffic stop. You don't always go back them up. If it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it isn't probably a thing to do. But if you got nothing else, you're going to drive by just to back them up, just to sit behind them. But you need to know where they are, because if all of a sudden there's that on the radio, you recognize that voice. You know it's Bergin over here. Where was he? He was at King and Beauregard. Let's go. So there's just so much stuff going on. It's overwhelming at first. I remember the first day I was driving the cop car. I drove right up on a car crash that I didn't see until I was on top of it. There's a car off the road up in the front yard of a house, and I'm just so either tunnel vision or focused that I didn't see it, and I should have seen it. And certainly now I would see it, and any cop would see it. But that's what cops go through, and that's a lot of the stuff that I try to find a way to put in a story. I'll talk about training a new officer and the things she sees and doesn't see, and the difference between a new officer and an old officer. And sometimes the excitement and zeal of a new officer versus the boredom of an older officer who just doesn't, he's a drunk. He's always a drunk. Leave him there. He's in the gutter. He'll get up later. Well, he might be freezing. Nah, he'll get up. He always gets up. And she gets up. She gets out. And it turns out he's having a diabetic seizure. So I like to let people see what cops do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we're talking about writing, which is fascinating, and your point of view is very interesting. And in the show notes, if folks have cop questions, they can reach out to you. But talk to me about the importance of community in your writing world. You've talked about a little bit with
the writing community.
Yeah, like what? How has that helped? What has that done?
It's kept me motivated. It's kept me moving forward. It's kept me from sitting upstairs and just binging Netflix. I've got a good friend, Jeff Higgins, who invited me into my writing group in 2019. And since then, he's published 4 books because he's a machine. And he writes all the time. In addition to running a restaurant full time, he writes by dictating while he's walking to his restaurant. He's got about a 15-block walk every day. And he talks into that dragon system that a lot of people use. Yeah. And he can dictate. He can think that way. He can remember what he's saying and propel his things forward. And then he'll look at the notes later, and if he missed something, he can go back. And he's just writing all the time. And we have coffee and say, how's your writing going? I cleaned up a note on the chapter list. What I'm actually trying to do, and I'll see if it works. I read something about Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov used to keep 3 different typewriters or word processors on his desk because he'd have at least 3 projects going, and he'd be typing a new robot story and he'd get bored or stuck or just wanted to stop. And then he'd go to the new Foundation story and he'd just switch over, and he could do that. I'm in the middle of a 3rd book. I'm plotting a 4th book. I have a historical about the grandfather of some of these characters set in 1919 in Yellowstone National Park, just after World War I. I have a sci-fi that's kind of time travel, and I'm rewriting a short story for the BoucherCon anthology for next year that's called Borders and Boundaries, and I've got a story that can fit. I'm rewriting a story for the next Malice anthology, which is, I forget whether it's elderly or old folks or something like that, but I've got an old cop and a young cop in a short story. So I'm working on all of those things kind of simultaneously. So I can get past, it took me a long time to get the new book done, the 2nd book. A sub-theme of the book is faith, belief in God, belief in, or wondering about how God might step in down here. Kelly survives a shooting in a way that he shouldn't have survived. He's shot at point blank range with a machine gun, and he doesn't have a scratch on him. There's no way to explain it. So his friends say, hey, God saved you. And Kelly doesn't quite buy that because that's not how he thinks of God. But he starts trying to think about God that way. He's married to a Jewish woman, so their kids are Jewish. He gets to take the daughter to bat mitzvah lessons. He gets to talk to a rabbi. She's handling a murder case involving a Muslim. She gets to talk to the Muslim's imam about these issues. Hey, she says, what in your faith do you think God does down here? Does God ever step in? Because Kelly thinks no. Kelly thinks, of course, God doesn't do anything good down here, because otherwise he would do good all the time. He would stop bad things from happening. He didn't. If he wanted to save me, why didn't he tell the kid to put the machine gun away 10 minutes before? What's this all about? But I got to a chapter where Kelly was going to be confronting a group of Sikhs, Indians, and I couldn't make it work. Among my failures is I have to write along a timeline. I can't jump. I can make notes, but I have to tell the story linearly. And when I got to this, I was just stuck for about a month or 2. Couldn't make this scene work, couldn't envision it. And I said, I can't stay here. So I sat down and I just put him in the room and had him say all kinds of stuff and had the other people say all kinds of stuff and had everybody move through the scene and back out on the street and left it. And it actually worked out really well. It almost wasn't edited at all. I left that scene pretty much the way it had vomited out of me. So it'll be interesting. But you never know. I do the noir at the bar where we read sort of noirish, sometimes violent stories in a 6 or 7 minute time frame in a crowd, and people like it. And I just did one where I happened to read my very, very first story that I'd written for a noir back in 2015 or 16 that was just in the BoucherCon anthology in 2023, which is up for an Anthony. Oh my gosh, look at little me. All these other people got me where I am. I'm reading the story because I hadn't expected to read it. I'm reading it from a book. Jeff Higgins, in my group that owns the restaurant, has got a library of fiction books, including mine. So I pulled it down and I'm reading it, and I'm reading with a microphone, and I'm reading this story. And when I got to a page break, about 2-3 chapters from the end, and I paused, everybody started applauding. And I've gone back and I think that might be a better place to stop. What if I stopped it right there and didn't have those last 2 paragraphs? Maybe I don't need those paragraphs. Maybe I don't. Who knows? It's why we can't edit ourselves. It's why a writer's group that gives us help. Now you've written 10 books and 3 series. You certainly have an editor. You certainly have maybe multiple editors at Kensington or whatever. I'm sure that you see the value in it. I'm betting sometimes you have challenges with it. Do you? Are you always comfortable with what your editor says?
Well, there are different kinds of editors. And, I think somebody to really challenge you to write a better book and be a better writer is the best gift you can have. So a good editor who does that, I think, is a gift. I'm very comfortable with that.
Your editor does that? Do they do? I gave the 2 examples. Do they say, this doesn't work for me, or this would work better if you made the cat a bird?
I've had 3 different editors, and I won't say which is better, but I've had people who are just like, this isn't clear on page 186. That's it. And then I've had people who will say, why is she doing this here? This doesn't seem in character. And I actually prefer the why is she doing this here? I like people to challenge. I think writers groups, there's no one way to do this, but I do think having a reader who maybe isn't even another writer, but is a reader who knows the genre, who can say, you lost me here, this didn't happen, is also a gift. It's just opening yourself up to that and feeling confident enough to say, I'm not going to fix that. I mean, I'm comfortable with it, but also saying, if somebody's getting lost or doesn't understand what happened here, then I didn't do my job,
I like both kinds of editors. I have not yet worked with a publisher's editor who's going to try and improve my work that way. Yeah. Had a couple of short stories edited. One where the editor said, this would work well if you told it, instead of in the guy's point of view on the surveillance, you told it in the girl cop's point of view. Because then she could comment more on what the guy's the focus of the story, but with someone else describing him, it works better than him having to act things out. Yeah. And that was brilliant. Stacey Woodson helped me a lot with a story that was just in Michael Bracken and Stacey's anthology that I always get the name wrong of. Scattered, smothered, covered, and chunked. It's about Waffle House. And she, like I just described, truncated my ending, got rid of a lot of drivel that sort of
took away from it, yeah.
Took away from the impact. I went from the impact point to a sort of ironic observation. And she got rid of the ironic observation, and it's a 10 times better story. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Level Best is going to do for me. Yeah. I know Sean Riley Simmons, whose business it is, does a lot of the editing. I don't know whether she's going to be my editor. I hope so, but we'll see. And again, it's an interesting circumstance because I've written book 2. I'm writing book 3. They've accepted book 2, but not in its final form. So here I am writing book 3 thinking, I've got a character that's growing here. What if in book 2, she did this? I can go back. I can make her 6'2". I can make her something else. I can change her a little bit that'll lead better into 3. And at the same time, I'm writing 4 kind of at the same time. So I've got this big quagmire that I'm trying to.
So as we're closing out, what's your best piece of advice for folks who are sort of come to that point in their lives where they've always said, I want to do it. And, because writing a book isn't simple. So a lot of people say they want to do it, but they may not finish. And what's the worst piece of writing advice that you got or that you've heard other people get?
The best piece is have faith in your voice at the start. Write it. Write the story. Write the whole story. Have faith that you're telling a story that you want to tell. And then have trust in somebody, because somebody has to read it. If nobody reads what you wrote, you're not a writer. You're a person that plays with paper. And yeah, it might be your mom. It might be your best friend. It might be somebody in the library's mystery writing group that you just found out a month ago and you've gone to a meeting and you come in with some pieces of paper. and you say, can I talk to you folks? Know that everybody that has ever written anything wrote their first thing at some point. James Patterson wrote the Thomas Berryman number back in the 70s or something, and has gone on to everything he's written. Lee Reacher wrote a first novel. Alistair MacLean wrote a first short story that impressed somebody enough. They said, give us a whole novel like this. But everybody starts. And everybody fails. Every person in this business, other than maybe Ross Thomas or Andy Weir, failed the first time they did it. Ross Thomas wrote The Cold War Swap, and his neighbor was an agent and liked it and called up a publisher and got him a deal in a week. Andy Weir wrote The Martian in chapter by chapter, sending it to his friends. And one of the friends said, this is really good. I'm going to show this to somebody. And that somebody was an agent. And in the same week, the story goes, he got a $100,000 publishing deal and a $100,000 movie deal. Now, we know a $100,000 publishing deal doesn't exactly make you rich, but it sure gets you going. Yeah. But I got 100 rejections. Well, I sent out 100 queries. I got 34 rejections, and the others I got nothing back on apprehension until I finally got it published. I was lucky with the second book because about the 8th or 9th person that I queried had read the first book. And they said, I liked your first book. So I was merciless and pestered them and pestered them and pestered them. Sometimes it's who you know. Sometimes it's how you know them. It's getting to know the business. Don't ever think that very first thing you wrote is what's going to get published. Make it better, make it better, make it better all the time, and get help with it. The worst piece of advice I ever got, not exactly advice. I was at Thriller Fest, and they have a thing called Pitch Fest where you pitch to agents. And before the Pitch Fest, the second year that they were doing this, you had a chance to pitch to experienced writers who would listen to how you're doing your pitch. Pitching is telling an agent what your book's all about and trying to convince them that you're the person that they should be hiring. And I pitched someone who I won't identify because he's still in the business. He's one of the ones that picked up a series of books by an author who died. And it wasn't the Robert Ludlum series, it was somebody else, but we'll leave it at that. And I told him what my book was about. He said, you're at Thriller Fest. Why are you here? Well, what do you mean? Well, your book's not a thriller. What does that mean? Well, there's no supervillain. Well, of course not. In police work, there's no such thing as a supervillain. I mean, unless you're Jeffrey Deaver. You don't have life or death stakes. I said, well, they really aren't life or death. I mean, cops can get killed all the time, but that's not the way it works in police work. You don't have a hero that's the only person who can solve it. I said, no, he's a cop. There's lots of cops. I just happen to be writing about this one. And I just couldn't figure out, I guess he just didn't like me. Because it was nasty. Thriller Fest, yes, Thriller Fest is designed for thriller writers. But there's an awful lot of mystery writers and crime writers and suspense writers. Gone Girl isn't a thriller, I don't think, but it's an exciting book. It's not set up according to that guy's parameters. Mm-hmm. So it was funny. He was probably the nastiest person I've ever met in the business. Other than an agent who, when I was pitching this current book that has white people and black people and brown people and Spanish people and Indian people and Muslim people, and she looked at me in my white shirt and tie and said, who do you think you are writing a book like this? How do you think you know about these people? Because I know each and every one of these people. They're all real people. I've given them some extra words, but every single thing, every single situation I wrote about, I was in. Not all at once, not all in the same case, but in 28 years, you deal with a lot of things. And I guess maybe the best advice out of that is don't let anybody get you down. If somebody is telling you negative things, talk to somebody else and go to conferences. Mm-hmm. That's 3 answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's also hear what people are saying and, you can listen to it because, one person saying, who are you to write this book? Part of me can kind of understand that, but the other part's like, because you wrote this book. I mean, that's, you gotta stand by it. And also, but you also did the work, Mark, to make sure those characters were rich and not stereotypes.
We'll see.
And yeah. So, that's part of it too. All right. This has been a great conversation. And I
like
thank
this
you
a lot,
so
Julie.
much. Yeah, this is great. So
I didn't get a chance to ask you lots of questions like, should I call you Julie or Julianne or JH? That's fascinating. I love that you do that. I may have to consider nom de plume for some other works that I'm doing outside of the Kelly series.
Yeah.
And I've been entertaining myself thinking what I would call myself.
My only advice on that is make sure you respond to it. And that's why all my names sound like Julie, because if it was a different name, I wouldn't respond.
I think that's spycraft. I've actually read that in somebody's spy novels. Pick a name that's enough like yours that you'll
the same initials, so that, if you sort of, but no, I think pen names that's a whole conversation, but likely if you switch genres or if you want to, it will be an open secret, but I think it's good to think about it before you have to.
Well, maybe someday I'll get an agent and they can give me some advice.
There you go.
I'm still unagented. So any agents out there?
Well,
Jill, this was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I love talking craft. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No. This was great. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersincrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.